Hello everyone, welcome again. Last session we spoke about when the soul departs, how we deal with the person who has passed, and our responsibilities. Today we begin with the funeral and the burial. Uh, so the funeral oftentimes, and I want to begin with this, I want to apologize in advance if I offend anyone or insult anybody's sensibilities, because what I'm going to say is sort of contrary to what many of us do at a funeral. So let's begin. The funeral is meant to honor the person who has passed. It is not designed to comfort the mourner. Does that happen? Of course it does. So the first thing to address that is this custom to greet the mourner prior to the funeral service. That is really contrary to what we believe. And in a chapel service where we have this receiving line, I believe it's both exhausting and inappropriate to have that have a mourner stand there or sit there and get up and sit down and get up and sit down as everybody walks by to offer their condolences. Honestly, that's what Shiva is for, is to offer condolences. So I always encourage anyone that I deal with not to have a receiving line at the chapel. It simply really is not the place for comforting mourners. It's a place to really honor the person who has passed. And so with that in mind, as we honor the person who has passed, we offer psalms and other prayers that will honor their memory. The custom generally is to recite Psalm 23, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." Also, other prayers, psalms that would reflect the character of the person who has passed. Prior to the start of the service, we tear the clothing. So again, in our day, many of us are uncomfortable with tearing clothing, so we have a ribbon that is torn. Again, this represents the rending or tearing of clothing. But to me, it's a little, as we say in Yiddish, untam. It doesn't have the same character and reflect the deep tear that we feel when someone we love is taken from us. And so to tear clothing is really the most appropriate way to honor this moment. Following the rending of clothing or the tearing of the ribbon, we then begin the service. We, as I mentioned before, psalms, prayers, and the eulogies. Eulogies are most effectively done by children or spouse, but the rabbi or respected members of the community generally offer the words that will honor the person who has passed. One of the reasons I think for this is that the rabbi, or again a respected or a learned member of the community, is more comfortable with public speaking, knows how to frame and have a eulogy flow. But I think, and this is what I offer to families, is the idea that the personal reflections of a child, the personal reflections of a sibling, or of a spouse really carry the most weight, where I, as a rabbi, I'm sort of reporting, unless, of course, it's somebody that the rabbi knows very well, in which case then those personal reflections are give more weight. Following the eulogies, usually the Kel Malei Rachamim, the memorial prayer, is recited. And if it's a chapel service, then we then move to the cemetery. The cemetery procession, the funeral procession, going to the cemetery is done slowly. It's done respectfully. Here in Pennsylvania, at least, there is a law that people must wait for a funeral procession. Sometimes people don't observe that law. In other states, that law doesn't exist any longer, and you're sort of on your own, which creates its own problems, because the idea of a dignified burial, a dignified ceremony, is just that. It's from the moment of that the funeral begins through the procession, through the burial itself. At the cemetery, if there is a cemetery service and not a chapel service, then many of the psalms and the eulogies are recited at graveside. However, once the chapel service is over, there are really basically three prayers that are done. The first is Psalm 90. It is Psalm 91, I'm sorry, which is recited during the procession from the hearse to the gravesite. The second would be the Tziddik Hadin. This is the formal funeral service. And then the Malay and Kaddish. The Kemalei Rachamim that recited at the chapel is recited again here at graveside, and then Kaddish. There are varying customs regarding the burial itself. For the most observant, the most traditional, is a full burial. We lower the aron, we lower the casket, and then fully cover the gravesite. In the modern world, where there are liners in some cemeteries because of the water table, this creates some complications, and it takes a little longer sometimes, but it is not out of the realm of possibility. That is the most traditional way, is for Jews, for the mourners, for those attending, to honor the person being buried by fully covering the grave. Some have the tradition of covering up to the liner so that at least the casket is covered. And then there is a tradition that took place mostly during the 60s and early 70s, where the casket was left up and people would come by and throw some dirt on the casket. So those are the three customs. Again, the most traditional is to cover completely, lower and cover completely, and then cover the casket, and then just leave the casket up. There are many who will stay after the service itself to make sure that the casket is covered completely. But again, it's really important, out of respect for and to honor the person who has passed, to cover completely. So once the person, the casket is covered, and we complete the service, we offer now traditional words of comfort to mourners. The phrase Hamakom Yenachem Etchem B'toch Sharavei Le'Tzion V'Yerushalayim, may the Lord comfort and sustain you among other mourners in Zion and Jerusalem. So this is, now we turn our attention from the person being buried to the family. This is where we begin the comfort to mourners, and that will be in our part 3 next time. Thank you for your attention.